If you want to talk about what my earliest exposure to comedy was, I guess back in those days we only had 3 TV stations. There was TV1, TV2, which is RTM, and also TV3. So we had, you know, a couple of British sitcoms. Actually, one of the first sitcoms that I do remember, which really struck me, was Mork and Mindy, which was Robin Williams' break in the industry. And I must have been 15 or 14, and my friends who'd been to the States brought back VHS videotapes of Mork and Mindy, the sitcom. So that's how I knew Robin Williams first of all, was via Mork and Mindy, the sitcom. So I would say that was the first sitcom comedy that I was aware of. In terms of stand-up comedy, a friend of mine had brought back Eddie Murphy. Used to be a stand-up comedian. He was one of the biggest stand-up comedians before he became an actor. And he did a stand-up comedy film called Delirious and Raw, 2 films. And I watched these videotapes, VHS videotapes. So that was my first exposure to stand-up comedy. And when I was watching it, I just enjoyed it. But it didn't strike me till later when I started doing stand-up comedy that, okay, that was my guide, if you will. That was how I learned or discovered what stand-up comedy was. So that'll be that. I wasn't a very average. I knew that I was smart, but I was not smart at school, because you know how school is, right? You got to read, you got to remember, then you got to regurgitate, and that's all it was. Now, I wasn't great at reading. I like reading what I found interesting. I didn't find school books interesting. I found other books interesting. So when it came to exams, I never got great results. But I knew that I don't know this, I can't do this, but I can do that. So it didn't really bother me in the sense that I didn't feel, oh, I'm stupid or I don't get good. But I was mostly a B student, or even a C, or sometimes a D student, let's put it that way. But I mean, whenever I meet anyone young nowadays who's like, oh, I'm not doing well in school, I say, you know what? Don't worry too much about that, because eventually, especially nowadays, you find something that you're good at, and you can make that, your career, your living, your job or whatever. So as a student, I wasn't great, but hey, I'm doing all right now. I did not know this, but in school, my school friends now tell me, like when I became a comedian, they were like, yeah, you definitely, you were destined to be that. They tell me that I was the funny guy in class. I don't remember that, but apparently I used to be the one at the back of the class, like telling stories, making sound effects, like Star Wars scenes and all, reenacting them using all the sound effects, C-3PO and R2-D2 and Sky X-Wing fighters and stuff. So I used to be the guy telling funny stories at the back of the class, disrupting the class, usually getting called up and caned for it. I don't know whether they still have caning nowadays in school, but so they tell me that. They say, yeah, that you were already doing that then. I don't remember that. But I think back to it, I guess I was, But in those days, you're not thinking, like a kid now who's like messing around with a camera, he's not thinking, I'm going to be, photographer. They just, this is what I like to do. I like to tell funny stories. And it became my career. The first time I performed it was, in fact, at the Subang Airport Hotel, like I said, in 1991, where a friend of mine she was working at the hotel and she was the PR. Then she said, hey, Ariff, get up on stage and tell your funny stories. So it wasn't I didn't know it as stand-up, she didn't know it as stand-up. I guess I knew what she meant, but nobody in the audience knew what I was doing. So I got up on stage and I had a string of funny stories that I used to tell my friends, real stories, things that happened to me, my observations. So that became my first show, but it wasn't really a planned show. That went on for about, I think, maybe 12 minutes. I think there were 3 or 4 people in the audience, no big deal. And then later on, I went to watch a guy called Rafiq Rashid who used to perform at this jazz bar, and he would play guitar and he would sing, and he would change the lyrics to songs. It was really funny and quite political as well. And then while I was watching him, he took a break, and then someone said to him, "Hey, this kid tells funny stories." So I got up on stage, my second show, did it, and then everybody laughed, and then somebody saw me at that show and then said, "Hey, can you come and do my show?" Somebody saw me at that show and said, "Hey, can you come and do my show?" So that's actually how it started. But when I first was doing it, I can tell you that for the first 15 years or so, most of the audience didn't know what stand-up comedy was. We don't have a history of stand-up comedy in Malaysia. There's no culture of it. And the only people who know what stand-up comedy is are people who've been to the States, people who've been to England, people who watch videotapes. This is prior to YouTube, prior to the internet. So in those days, you know, when I got up on stage and started doing my stand-up comedy, usually 3/4 of the audience would be sitting there wondering who I am, what am I doing, because I only did corporate shows. I did corporate events, corporate dinners. So when you have a corporate dinner, what happens is your company has a dinner, then you know they have a speech, then you have a dance, then you have a band, and then suddenly I would come on. So these people, okay, I wasn't singing, I wasn't dancing, I wasn't the chairman, I wasn't giving a speech, but I was just telling funny stories. So I can see in the audience, people are watching me like, "Hey, what's he doing?" And then they start laughing, and then after the show, they'd come up to me like, "Hey, I like your talk show." They call it a talk show. I like your talk show, very funny lah. So in the first 10 or 15 years, there was not a culture of it. People didn't know what it was. Now, since YouTube really exploded about 5 years ago, I think, you know, everybody suddenly was like, "Oh, Russell Peters, Russell Peters." People come up to me and go, "Hey, you are just like Russell Peters." So they were exposed via YouTube to Russell Peters, and they suddenly saw a Malaysian doing it. So that they think Russell Peters is the only stand-up comedian in the world. But so by now, I mean, the younger kids and all you guys and all you know, everything you want is on YouTube and you're exposed to it. So now the audience is slightly more mature, and there is a growing stand-up comedy scene in KL in Malaysia.